Hi, my name is Amy, and today my topic is going to be about choice versus chance, the theme of death in To Build a Fire and A Summer Tragedy. Death comes to us all, but rarely on the same terms. In literature, as in life, how we meet our end often reveals more about our humanity than how we've lived. Jack London's To Build a Fire and Arnold Bantham's A Summer Tragedy offers us two profoundly different encounters with mortality, one shaped by chance and the other by choice. In the frozen wilderness of the Yukon, London's unnamed protagonist stumbles unwittingly towards his fate, a victim of his own arrogance and nature's indifference. Meanwhile, in the humid American South, the elderly Pattons face their end with clear-eyed resolve, choosing the time and manner of their departure from a world that has become unbearable. These contrasting journeys raise profound questions. Is there more dignity in choosing one's end than in having it thrust upon us unexpectedly? Does awareness of approaching death bring clarity or despair? And ultimately, which is more terrifying, a death we see coming or one that catches us unaware? Today, I'll be focusing on these two powerful stories, and through them, we'll explore how choice and chance shape not just how characters die, but what their deaths mean to them, to readers, and to our understanding of what it means to face our final moments with humanity intact. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of background context about this story. In the freezing Yukon wilderness, an unnamed man travels alone, despite warnings about the extreme cold. Ignoring advice to bring a companion, he navigates the trail with only a dog. After falling through ice and getting wet, he struggles desperately to build a fire to save himself from freezing. When snow from a tree extinguishes his fire, he attempts to run and maintain warmth, then contemplates killing his dog for contemporary warmth. Eventually, he surrenders to the cold, experiencing a peaceful hallucination before freezing to death. The dog abandons his body and heads towards camp, guided by instinct where human arrogance failed. In A Summer Tragedy, the story begins by introducing the elderly sharecroppers Jeff and Jenny Patton, meticulously preparing for what it seems like a special outing. Jeff dresses in his Sunday best, despite physical pain from years of labor, while Jenny, now blind, carefully prepares herself. As they drive away from their cabin, we learn that they have lost all 5 of their children. Jenny has gone blind, and Jeff can barely work due to partial paralysis. Despite decades of hard work, they face poverty and deteriorating health. The outing is later revealed to be their planned suicide. They deliberately drive their car into the river, choosing to end their lives together rather than continue to suffer. The main characters of these two stories are the unnamed man, who is young, inexperienced, confident, but overconfident, which makes him arrogant, and Jenny and Jeff Patton from A Summer Tragedy, who are elderly, experienced, and facing deterioration. In the first story, To Build a Fire, London's protagonist faces death through a series of chance events and poor decisions. His fatal flaw is his arrogance, being overconfident and believing that he can conquer the Yukon's extreme cold through intellect alone. Despite warnings about traveling solo in temperatures below 50 degrees, he ventures out, confident in his abilities. The writer writes, "Well, here he was. He had had the accident. He was alone, and he had saved himself. Those old men were rather womanish," he thought. All a man must do was to keep his head, and he was all right. Any man who was a man could travel alone. This quote portrays his overconfident personality, which eventually led him into making irreversible choices that led to his death. In the story, when he accidentally breaks through ice and wets his legs, what was a dangerous journey becomes a desperate struggle for survival. In To Build a Fire, Jack London presents death not as an immediate inevitability, but as a growing threat that the protagonist continuously attempts to avoid. but eventually he had to surrender to the overwhelming power of nature. The author used multiple tryouts of him trying to build the fire and highlight a contrast between human effort and nature. His first fire, built under a tree, is extinguished by the falling snow, an ironic moment where nature undoes his careful effort. As his extremities freeze, London describes his growing awareness of mortality with clinical detachment. Panic sets in as he fails to light another fire with frozen hands, even trying to kill his dog to use its warm body for heat, an act that signals his desperation. His increasingly irrational actions reflect the slow erosion of control. The man's final moments reveal the cruel irony of his situation. He dies not in agony, but in peaceful acceptance after fighting so desperately to live, and he finally accepts his fate. He stops running and stops building the fire, and lies down peacefully because he had no other choice. In the story, it was a good idea, he thought, to sleep his way to death. Freezing was not as bad as people thought. There were many worse ways to die. His death is meaningless in nature's grand scheme, emphasized by the dog's practical abandonment of his body, and it made a strong contrast to his arrogance in the beginning of the story, where he chose to not believe the old man's words and continue with his trail. In the end of the story, he finally realizes and says, "You were right, old fellow, you were right." But it was already too late to regret his choice. London shows death by chance as the ultimate reminder of human insignificance against natural forces that are indifferent towards everyone. In this story, we see a man who never chose to die, but whose choices led him inevitably towards death. On the other hand, Bontemps presents death as a deliberate choice for the Pattons. Their careful preparations, Jeff donning his Sunday suit despite his partial paralysis, Jenny wearing her wedding dress, transforming their suicide into a dignified ritual rather than an act of desperation. Unlike London's protagonist, who fights against death until the end, the Pattons embrace it as a release. Their decision stems from compounding hardships: the loss of all 5 children, Jenny's blindness, Jeff's increasing paralysis, and the economic exploitation they faced as sharecroppers. After 50 years of labor, they have nothing to show but debt and deteriorating bodies. As London describes in the story, now he was old, worn out. Another paralytic stroke, like the one he had already suffered, would put on his back for keeps. In that condition, with a frail, blind woman to look after him, he would be worse off than if he were dead. The continuing of their lives is no longer a gift, but a burden that they wish to leave off. The most powerful aspect of their choice is its shared nature. They decide together, understanding each other without words after decades of marriage. Their final drive into the river represents agency reclaimed. When Jeff briefly hesitates, it's not fear of death, but a momentary attachment to life that gives him pause. Thinking about their situation, the writer wrote, "Suddenly Jeff's hands became steady. He actually felt brave." Bontemps portrays their suicide not as tragedy, but as triumph, a final assertion of dignity and self-determination in lives otherwise controlled by external forces. Through their choice, the Pattons transform what could be a desperate end into something approaching a sacrament. The contrasting approaches to death in these stories reveal profound truths about human dignity in the face of mortality. London's unnamed man, victim of chance, experiences a desperate struggle followed by resignation. His dignity is compromised by panic and the indignity of its final moments. Attempting to run with frozen feet and contemplating killing his companion dog. His death holds a certain ironic peace only after the struggle has ended, but it remains fundamentally reactive rather than intentional. The Pattons, however, transform their death through choice and ritual. They dressed in their finest clothes, creating ceremony around what could be viewed as tragedy. Their choice reflects not desperation but calculation, a rational response to unbearable circumstances. In their coordinated decision, they maintain agency even as their bodies fail them. Their dignity comes from choosing the terms of their departure after a lifetime where external forces dictated most other aspects of their existence. Both stories force us to confront uncomfortable questions. Does foreknowledge of death enhance or diminish our humanity? Is it better to rage against mortality or accept it with grace? London suggests that death reveals our ultimate powerlessness, while Bontemps proposes it can be our final act of self-determination. The environment in each story serves as more than backdrop. It's an active force shaping mortality. London's hostile wilderness represents indifferent natural forces that extinguish life without malice. Bontemps' rural South embodies systemic oppression that gradually crushes human spirit until death becomes preferable to continued suffering. What both authors ultimately reveal is that dignity in death isn't determined by how we die, but by how we face our mortality. London's man achieves a kind of dignity only in his final surrender to the inevitable, while the Pattons find theirs in taking control of the uncontrollable. As we reflect on these powerful narratives, we might ask ourselves, which requires more courage? Fighting against death until the last moment, or walking deliberately towards it on our own terms? Perhaps the answer lies not in how death comes, by choice or by chance, but in whether we face it with the full measure of our humanity intact. And here are the resources I used, which are the two stories. Thank you.